5:42 a.m. November 2nd, 1914, Bosphorus Strait. A frigid fog snaked along the water surface, obscuring the shoreline. Through the swirling mist, the outlines of stone fortifications, gun emplacements, and villages clinging precariously to the cliffs were barely visible. The Ottoman Empire stirred alife under a somber, gray sky. Coastal artillery crews stood beside their 150mm and 240mm guns, their hands numb from the biting cold. Patrol boats chugged slowly through the strait, their engines sputtering and coughing. The entire waterway was charged with tension, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire through Istanbul. A pivotal event was imminent. On the decks of the battle cruiser, Yavuz Sultan Selim, formerly the German ship Goeben, officers scanned the horizon with watchful eyes. The ship's massive 28 centimeters main guns remained silent, yet the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the metal itself sensed the empire teetering on the brink of change. The Ottoman flag snapped crisply in the wind, a symbol of defiance against the gathering storm. He, Enver Pasha, stood in the war room of the Ministry of War in Istanbul, his uniform immaculate, his eyes burning with ambition. At only 33 years old, he exuded a self-assuredness that suggested he believed history was finally bending to his will. Maps lay spread across a long wooden table, detailing the Caucasus, the Black Sea, and the Suez Canal. Every arrow drawn on the paper pointed towards a future he was determined to seize. Outside the windows, the city throbbed with life. Market stalls were opening, and imams were calling the faithful to the first prayers. But beneath the veneer of routine, a quiet fear pulsed. The empire was weak, its borders crumbling, its armies exhausted. Every officer knew it, and Enver was no exception. But he refused to yield to despair. He clutched a telegram from Berlin, its words promising weapons, gold, military advisors, and, most importantly, protection against Russia. The message felt like a lifeline in a sea of troubles. Another telegram lay beside it, this one from the Ottoman ambassador in London. It brought news of Britain's seizure of 2 Ottoman dreadnoughts, the Sultan Osman I and Resadai, ships paid for with donations crowdsourced from patriotic Ottoman citizens. The loss stung like a bitter betrayal, igniting widespread rage across the empire. The British justified their actions as a wartime necessity, but few in Istanbul accepted that excuse. Enver reread the lines, his mind racing. The old alliances were collapsing, and new ones had to be forged. In the corridors of power, voices clashed with increasing intensity. Grand Vizier Said Halim Pasha urged caution, while Finance Minister Javad Bey warned that the treasury was nearing collapse. Senior generals argued that the army was ill-prepared for war. Rifles were mismatched, artillery shells were scarce, and transport animals were dying by the thousands. The empire lacked deep reserves, a robust industrial base, and modern logistics. But Enver pressed forward, undeterred. If we do nothing, he declared, we die slowly. If we act, we may yet rise. He repeated this mantra until even he fully believed it. The hidden motivations began to surface. The first motive was fear, a primal and deeply rooted fear. Russia loomed to the north, its Black Sea fleet growing stronger, its armies larger. For centuries, Russia had steadily chipped away at Ottoman territory, seizing Crimea, vast swaths of the Caucasus, and exerting increasing influence in the Balkans. Even now, Russian diplomats were pressuring the empire over control of the strategic straits. The Ottomans understood Russia's ultimate ambition, warm water ports and unrestricted access to the Mediterranean. The second motive was revenge. The humiliations of the Balkan Wars, 1912 to 1913, still stung. Nearly 45% of Ottoman territory in Europe had been lost, and hundreds of thousands of Muslims had fled as refugees. Ottoman leaders vowed that they would never again suffer such disgrace. The third motive was desperation. The empire's economy was suffocating, strangled by foreign debt that devastated its finances. Modern weapons had to be imported, but money was scarce. Joining a powerful bloc, Germany and Austria-Hungary, seemed like the only path to survival. And the fourth motive, whispered in hushed tones during private conversations, was ambition. Enver envisioned a revitalized empire, modern, strong, and respected on the world stage. Some claimed he dreamed of uniting Turkic peoples across Central Asia. Whether that was true or not, his decisions were infused with a bold, almost reckless hope. Preparation in the shadows. Back at the Bosphorus, Ottoman engineers carefully moved crates bearing German script. Inside were rifle bolts, machine gun barrels, optical sights, and ammunition belts. Officers muttered numbers. 7 92 millimeters Mauser, 2,400 rounds per minute in combined machine gun defense. 75 millimeters field guns, 6 kilometers effective range. These shipments were the veins feeding a dying empire, providing a temporary surge of strength. On the Eastern Front, troops dug trenches near Erzurum. The cold arrived early, and frost formed on rifle stocks. The trenches were narrow, often only 3 meters deep, and some collapsed under the weight of melting snow. The men trained with limited ammunition, 3 rounds per target, no more. The supply line stretched in across the rugged mountains. Near Aleppo, cavalry brigades practiced maneuvers on dusty plains. Their horses were lean, their ribs visible beneath their hides. Disease spread faster than training. Officers wrote grim reports, but they rarely reached Istanbul. Across the empire, the Ottoman military prepared for war, but not with confidence. It was preparation born of necessity, not genuine readiness. An envelope arrives. In the Ministry of War, a clerk entered with a sealed envelope. Enver tore it open. It was from Admiral Sauchan, the German commander now leading the Ottoman Navy. The message was brief. The Black Sea is open. Russian ports lie undefended. A strike now will define the empire's destiny. Enver felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of his plans and ambitions. He glanced at a small framed photograph on his desk. His wife, Nasi Sultan, niece of the Sultan. She trusted him, believed in his vision for their future and the future of their children. The thought steadied him. He picked up the phone and issued orders to the fleet. His voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. Prepare to sail. No delay. With those words, the first irreversible step was taken, setting the empire on a course towards war. The clock moves toward violence. 8:12 a.m. The Yavuz Sultan Selim signaled its readiness. Destroyers formed protective screen around the battlecruiser, while torpedo boats followed close behind. The fleet moved north, its engines thundering across the water. Sailors stood at their stations, hands gripping triggers, eyes scanning the horizon through the haze. 11:30 a.m. The fog lifted, revealing the Black Sea, its surface shimmering like hammered iron. The ships maintained a tight formation, their flags snapping the wind. Officers measured wind direction and calculated firing arcs, preparing for potential engagements. They knew the 28 guns could reach targets over 20 kilometers away, each shell weighing nearly 300 kilograms. Enver's order was simple. Strike the Russian coast before Russia struck the empire. His justification was preemption, claiming the attack was a defensive measure. But his true motive was cementing an alliance with Germany by making neutrality impossible. The human thread holds attention. In the trenches near Katalka, a young soldier named Kemal unfolded a letter from his mother. She wrote about the olive harvest, the sick goats, and his younger sister's upcoming wedding. She had no idea that the empire was mere hours away from war. Kemal read the letter twice, carefully folding it and placing it inside his tunic, close to his heart. His hands trembled slightly, despite the warmth of the morning sun. On the Black Sea, a sailor on the cruiser Midilli, formerly the German ship Breslau, touched a small tin medallion around his neck, a gift from his brother. He offered a silent prayer, his voice lost in the wind. These small, personal acts anchored them to their humanity as history accelerated towards them. The final minutes before the storm. 4:27 p.m. The Ottoman fleet reached striking distance of the Russian ports. The gun crews stood ready, shells loaded into the breeches of their weapons. Fire control officers checked rangefinders, adjusting for wind speed at 12 knots. Every man knew that once the first shot was fired, the possibility of diplomacy would vanish. 4:29 p.m. A final message arrived from Istanbul. Proceed. 4:30 p.m. The gun captain raised his hand, his eyes fixed on the target. 4:31 p.m. He lowered it. The first shell roared from the barrel, shaking the deck with its force. History turned on that single, decisive moment. 5:47 Golden Horn Strait, Istanbul. A cold wind swept over the water, low clouds pressing down on the city. The German battlecruiser SMS Goeben and the light cruiser SMS Breslau, now flying Ottoman flags, as Yavuz Sultan Selim and Midilli floated in the strait like awakened steel beasts. Smoke lazily drifted from their funnels, while their crews moved with brisk, purposeful motions, tension evident in every gesture. Word spread to the officer corps. The empire was sliding inexorably toward war. Some officers approved of the impending conflict, others feared it, but none could halt the war machine once it had begun to move. In the Naval Ministry building overlooking the water, Enver Pasha stood with gloved hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the gray silhouettes of the ships. Telegrams from Berlin had arrived with increasing frequency and urgency, pressing him to make decisive commitments. The Empire's allies were watching, expecting unwavering loyalty, while its enemies anticipated weakness and hesitation. Every choice was a gamble, and the deck beneath his feet seemed to tremble with the weight of it. The Empire, he knew, had passed the point of cautious diplomacy. The first major engagement had drawn clear lines in the sand, making retreat impossible. A runner delivered a leather satchel containing the latest report from Black Sea Command. Enver broke the seal and scanned the message. Russian fleet detected west-southwest of Sevastopol, preparing for maneuvers. He carefully folded the paper, his mind already racing. Soon, neutrality would no longer be a tenable option. The Germans were applying relentless pressure, the British were tightening economic constraints, and the Russians were closely watching the straits. The Ottomans, weakened and tense, were forced to choose between a slow, agonizing decline and a violent, high-stakes gamble. On board the Yavuz Sultan Selim, Chief Gunnery Officer Lieutenant Commander Fritz Meyer inspected the main guns, 28 centimeters SKL/50 naval artillery, with a maximum range of 23 to 24 kilometers and a firing rate of up to 3 rounds per minute with an experienced crew. Ottoman sailors, newly assigned to the ship, struggled to match the practiced rhythm and efficiency of their German counterparts. Sweat mixed with the morning chill. One sailor nervously fingered a copper pendant engraved with his wife's initials, while another pressed a folded photograph to his chest, seeking comfort from the image. They all sensed that the ship might fire its guns today, though no one dared to speak it aloud. Meyer walked along the deck, correcting errors, shouting instructions, and ensuring that breaches were clean, ammunition was readily available, and any potential delays were eliminated. The ship vibrated, alive with anticipation and pent-up energy. By 9:12, the two cruisers were steaming north of Zonguldak at a speed of 24 knots, leaving a trail of coal dust coating the deck. A message arrived from Enver Pasha's office, ordering aggressive reconnaissance and action as provoked. Officers exchanged glances, scrutinizing the ambiguous phrase, as provoked to justify anything or nothing, leaving room for interpretation and potentially disastrous miscalculations. A smudge appeared on the horizon. Russian patrol vessels, Pamiat Mercuria, and escorts armed with 152 millimeters guns capable of firing up to 12 kilometers. Tension spread along the deck like spilled oil, igniting a sense of impending danger. Any engagement, no matter how small, could ignite full-scale hostilities. At 11:47, 35 kilometers south of Sevastopol, the Russians flashed signal lamps. Identify. Alter course. The Ottomans did not respond, maintaining their course and speed. The Russians fired a single shell, which splashed harmlessly into the sea, a warning rather than an attack. Meyer turned to the captain, seeking permission to engage. The captain granted permission. The primary battery opened fire on the lead Russian cruiser, at a range of 22 kilometers. The first salvo splashed harmlessly nearby, but the second struck closer and the third found its mark. A plume of water erupted from the Russian deck, followed by a cloud of smoke. The supporting cruiser Medulla added its firepower, unleashing its 105mm SK-L/45 guns at a rate of 15 to 18 rounds per minute. The sea became a grid of impacts, a deadly dance of bullets and shells piercing the mist. Machine guns fired at rates of 450 to 600 rounds per minute, adding to the chaos and destruction. Splinters whistled past, and steam burst from ruptured pipes. A Russian gun crew collapsed under a barrage of direct hits. Young sailor Kemal clutched the signal flag, his mother's letter pressed tightly to his chest. Her words echoed in his mind. If the sea is cold, remember home is warm. He pushed the thought aside, returning to his duty with renewed focus. By 12:06, the Russian formation fractured, their cohesion shattered by the relentless Ottoman assault. The Russian flagship listed precariously, while another cruiser veered northeast, trailing a thick plume of smoke. A destroyer attempted a torpedo run at a speed of 35 to 40 knots, approaching within a range of 2 to 4 kilometers. Ottoman secondary batteries targeted the vessel, shredding its deck with a hail of gunfire. A torpedo fell into the sea, running harmlessly empty. One Russian officer jumped into the water, disappearing behind a cloud of smoke. On the Yavuz, several 152mm shells bracketed the ship, and fragments injured an Ottoman sailor. He pressed a cloth to his thigh, whispering a silent prayer for protection. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes, yet time stretched thin for those caught in its midst, each second feeling like an eternity. The Russians withdrew north, their formation scattered and damaged. The sea gradually quieted, although the lingering smoke hinted at the violence that had just transpired. 1332 aboard the Yavuz. 3 wounded, 1 dead. Corporal Hassan Ozturk, 22 years old. Meyer found a sepia photograph in Hassan's pocket. Hassan with his sister, both laughing and carefree. He carefully set aside a silent tribute to the fallen sailor. The captain ordered the ship to return south. News of the engagement spread rapidly. Telegraphs reported that Ottoman vessels had opened hostilities on the Black Sea, attacking Russian ports and initiating acts of war. Enver Pasha received the news without betraying any sign of triumph or dread. Russia would undoubtedly respond. Britain and France would likely align against the Ottomans, and by tomorrow, the borders of the world might shift irrevocably. The Ottoman Empire, long adrift in the sea of indecision, had finally chosen its fate. By evening, the ships neared the Bosphorus, their silhouettes stark against the setting sun. The decks were silent, the engines thumping rhythmically, carrying the ships toward home. Kemal retrieved his mother's letter, reading it fully for the first time, trembling not from fear, but from profound understanding that a distant war had now engulfed his life. The streets of Istanbul buzzed with rumors, tales of victory, warnings of doom, and a general sense of uncertainty. Those watching the returning ships realized that a new age of suffering had begun. This was the second turning point, a moment where action shattered all illusion, pushing an empire to the very edge of commitment. The final escalation awaited, lurking just beyond the horizon. 6:03, Bosphorus Strait, Istanbul. Dawn broke slowly over the water, mist curling along the shoreline, gradually revealing the minarets of the city shrouded in gray. The Yavuz, Sultan Selim, and the Medulla steamed carefully through the narrow strait, their engines humming in a synchronized rhythm, their guns idle but ready for immediate action. The events of the previous day's clash in the Black Sea linger in the minds of every sailor, the memory of flashes, smoke, and the thunder shells still fresh in their minds. On the bridge, Enver Pasha's telegram continued to arrive, pressing him to make decisive commitments. Reports from Berlin and Vienna reinforced the pressure, emphasizing the need for unwavering loyalty and decisive action. The Empire's allies were watching, expecting unwavering support, while its enemies anticipated weakness and hesitation. Every choice was a gamble, and the deck beneath his feet seemed to tremble with the weight of it. The Empire, he knew, had passed the point of cautious diplomacy. The first major engagement had drawn clear lines in the sand, making retreat impossible. Meanwhile, the Black Sea fleets recalibrated. Russian ships withdrew towards Sevastopol, undertaking emergency repairs to address the damage sustained in the previous day's battle. The element of surprise had been lost, forcing a shift in their strategic approach. Crewmen scrubbed decks stained with coal dust and seawater, checked splintered gun mounts, and tallied ammunition, preparing for the inevitable next encounter. On the Yavuz, Lieutenant Commander Meyer meticulously inspected all 28 centimeters and 105 millimeters guns, ensuring that the mechanisms functioned flawlessly despite the stress and recoil of the previous day's engagement. Ammunition stocks were recalculated. 28 centimeter shells, 200 rounds per main turret, 105 millimeters, 1,800 rounds per ship. Every shot would have to count in the coming days. The days stretched on, carrying an undercurrent of tension that vibrated through the hull of the ship. Soldiers and sailors wrote letters, quickly scribbled notes to loved ones, pouring out their fears and hopes onto paper. Some tore the letters into pieces and tucked them into their pockets, while others entrusted them to officers, hoping they would eventually reach their destinations. Every message carried a heavy weight, the understanding that war now touched them directly, irrevocably altering their lives. Kemal, clutching his mother's letter for a final glance, felt the thin paper tremble in his hands, a fragile link to the world he was fighting to protect. Its warmth was a reminder of home, of what was at stake in the coming conflict. Outside, smoke from distant towns drifted over the water, a sign of both human activity and the encroaching conflict that waited beyond the horizon. By mid-morning 9:42, an Ottoman patrol reported sightings of additional Russian cruisers moving south along the coastline. Enver Pasha issued orders, intercept and engage if provoked. The crews, still recovering from the previous engagement, braced themselves for another escalation, steeling themselves to the inevitable violence. On the bridge, officers plotted firing solutions, meticulously factoring in distance, wind speed, and sea state. Visibility was limited to 8 kilometers, and waves churned at 1 to 2 meters, making accurate targeting even more challenging. The margin for error was small. One miscalculation, one delayed signal, could cost lives or compromise the Empire's strategic position. Suddenly, at 11:15, the Russians maneuvered aggressively, attempting to outflank the Yavuz and Midilli. Gun crews responded swiftly, pivoting their weapons and adjusting ranges and firing angles to counter the threat. The first salvo landed near the Russian lead cruiser, sending columns of water exploding skyward to a height of 20 meters. The secondary guns, firing at a blistering rate of 15 to 18 rounds per minute, added a shrapnel screen that forced the Russian destroyers to zigzag erratically to avoid the deadly barrage. The thunder of repeated volleys rattled the decks, shaking the ships to their very core. Splinters of wood embedded themselves into wooden fittings, a testament to the intensity of the bombardment. Metal groaned under the immense stress of continuous fire. The chaos was intense. Men shouted orders, relaying flags and flashing signal lamps rapidly to maintain communication amidst the pandemonium. Time dilated, each moment stretching out under the immense pressure. By 12:07, an Ottoman torpedo boat was sent to harass the enemy's flanks, drawing their attention and disrupting their formation. The torpedo boat sped across the water at 35 knots, carrying torpedoes capable of striking targets up to 4 kilometers away. The maneuver successfully distracted the Russian formation, drawing their attention to port and creating an opening for the Ottoman cruisers. At the same time, Yavuz's primary guns focused their fire on the lead Russian cruiser, unleashing a devastating barrage. Repeated impacts tore into the ship's superstructure, ripping apart steel plates and igniting raging fires. Flames erupted from the deck as secondary explosions rocked the vessel, sending debris flying in all directions. Russian sailors dove for cover or scrambled to escape the inferno, their desperate cries lost in the roar of battle. One officer fell into the sea, disappearing beneath a cloud of smoke and spray. Another clutched a photograph of family to his chest, a poignant reminder of the human cost of mechanical warfare. By 12:45, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Russian formation faltered under the concentrated Ottoman firepower, their losses mounting with each passing minute. 2 cruisers were damaged and a destroyer was crippled, limping away from the battle. Smoke from ruptured funnels blended with the fog, masking further Ottoman maneuvers and creating a dense, swirling haze. Enver Pasha, observing the battle from a distant shore office via telegraph updates, felt a momentary surge of vindication. The gamble had paid off, at least tactically. Strategically, however, the empire was now fully committed, with no turning back. The world was watching, lines had been drawn, and neutrality was no longer a viable option. The engagement wound down by 1322, as the Russian vessels retreated north toward Sevastopol, limping away under constant harassing fire. The sea gradually returned to an uneasy calm, although the echoes of battle still reverberated in the minds of sailors. The crew of Yavuz and Medillae counted their casualties. 3 wounded, 1 dead. Corporal Hassan Ozrik's photograph was carefully stowed away by Meyer, a solemn reminder of the human cost of victory. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of engines and the distant cries of gulls circling overhead. Officers relayed messages to Istanbul, while embassies around the world confirmed that the Ottoman Empire had officially entered hostilities. Political consequences rippled immediately. As alliances solidified, adversaries prepared for retaliation, and the map of Europe edged closer to a new and potentially devastating configuration. Evening falls. 1805, the Bosphorus Strait. The sun sank behind low red clouds, casting long shadows over the water, as the warships, victorious yet aware of the fragile peace between engagements, sailed home. Kemal read his mother's letter once more, the weight of her words heavy in his hands, a reminder of the life he was fighting to protect. Around him, men murmured quietly, absorbing both relief and apprehension, the reality of war settling heavily upon them. The city watched from the shore, catching glimpses of the returning ships, their presence a stark reminder of the conflict that had engulfed their nation. Rumors abounded, tales of victories, warnings of defeats, and a general sense of uncertainty about the future. The empire, long adrift in indecision, had finally chosen its course, a course that would lead them into the heart of the Great War. The decision echoed far beyond the shores of Istanbul, shaping strategy, technology adoption, and the very memory of the Ottoman role in World War I. The final lesson was clear. This engagement was more than a mere skirmish at sea. It was a turning point, a moment of irreversible commitment. Commanders learned the limits of communication, logistics, and coordination, while crews understood the human cost behind each decision. Guns, engines, and torpedoes served not only as instruments of power, but as symbols of commitment and consequence, forever shaping the destiny of the empire. For the empire, the day ended with both pride and foreboding. Europe was watching, alliances were shifting, and the Ottoman gamble, risky, deliberate, and irreversible, had begun to find a new chapter in the Great War.